Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about socionics. So, what is socionics? It's a personality typology. It's based on Jung's typology, which initially only had 8 types, and it was developed further by a Lithuanian researcher named Ausra Augustina Pichute, also known as Ausra Augusta, with a small group of collaborators. She added some ideas to Jung's typology, like Antony Kempinski's idea of information metabolism, which is the idea that our minds process information much like we process food for our physical body. So, socionics is a theory of how we process information. It's also about behavior and mental processes, how we act in service of certain goals that are built into our personality structure. In socionics, there are 16 types. It's much like MBTI or Myers Briggs, if you've heard of that, which is a popular Jungian typology in the English speaking world. But the types in socionics are very different from those in MBTI. So it's important to set aside any experience you have with MBTI if you want to learn socionics. If you haven't heard of MBTI, then that's even better. By the way, if you're interested in finding your type in socionics, check out the link in the description. In socionics, there are 4 different basic types of information. There's sensing, intuition, ethics, and logic. Sensing is about what you can touch or see or directly experience with your senses. It's about what's here and now. Intuition is about the imagination, past and future, possibilities, what occurs to the mind and can't be directly experienced. Logic is about impersonal information, facts, propositions, whether things are true or false, and tasks. Ethics is about personal information, people, feelings, relationships, personal character, tone, and how you communicate with people. So, intuition is the opposite of sensing, and logic is the opposite of ethics. So, the 4 domains make a square with opposites at opposite corners. Sensing and intuition together are called irrational information, which is about things that are directly apprehended with the senses or in the mind. And ethics and logic are rational information, which has to do with information itself, language, and communication. So within each of these 4 domains, there's an introverted version and an extroverted version. Introverted sensing is about things like stability, convenience, maintenance, peace and harmony, attending to physical needs, and making things pleasant and nice to experience. Extroverted sensing is about sensory impact, impressiveness, power, desires, demands, material gain, assertiveness, and it tends to seek intense sensations like thrill seeking. Introverted intuition is about meaning, depth, purpose. It means rejection of things that are considered bad, thinking about consequences and especially negative consequences, negativity in general, and the imagination, and creating fictional worlds or worlds inside the mind. Extroverted intuition expands potential and it explores or recognizes or generates possibilities, options, choices, ideas, and points of view. Introverted ethics is about character, relationships, emotional sensitivity, sympathy, likes and dislikes towards others and their conduct, attraction and repulsion, moral disgust, and right behavior. Extroverted ethics is about communication, expression, emotions, enthusiasm, passion, emphasis, how you present messaging and make things appeal to people and like they do in marketing. Introverted logic is about consistency, formal logic, but also the everyday meaning of logic in terms of whether something makes sense and is consistent. Is about order, structure, organization, like mental organization, having a clear view of things, but it can also be about physical organization when paired with sensing. Extroverted logic is about usefulness, pragmatism, resources, efficiency, whether methods and actions are effective and efficient and make sense. These are called the 8 elements of information metabolism, or IMEs, or IM elements. They relate to each other in certain ways. So, for example, if you take 2 elements in the same domain, like introverted sensing and extroverted sensing, these are called contrary elements, which conflict with each other. They're 2 opposite goals or ways of dealing with what is real and apparent in the world. We can say they have opposite attitudes, extroversion and introversion being the 2 attitudes. But if you also change the domain to the opposite one, then you'll get the complementary element. So introverted sensing is complemented by extroverted intuition because they're both irrational, but one is introverted, one is extroverted, one is sensing, one is intuition. This gets us into relationships. Socionics is also about relationships. It tells us how the different types tend to get along with each other. We'll talk more about that later. Now, if you take the element in the opposite domain but with the same attitude, you get what's called the superego element. This is another conflicting pair of elements. So introverted sensing and introverted intuition would be superegos. So all in all, there's 4 relationships between elements with the same rationality. There's identity and complementarity, which are harmonious relations, and contrary and superego, which are conflicting relations. This is how the type relations work too, but there's some extra complexity due to how the rational and irrational elements interact. We use all of the 8 I am elements, but we're better at using some of them, and we value some of them more than others. The 8 functions represent our relationship to each I am element, and together the 8 functions form the personality model in socionics, which is called Model A. The leading function is the I am element you focus on the most. It's the thing that you're very confident about, and it dominates your behavior. It's always on. It's the way you tend to help or criticize others. If you have some degree of experience and knowledge, you can use it to benefit others and society at large. The creative function is sort of a sidekick to the leading function, and together the two determine the type. The creative has to be of the opposite attitude and opposite rationality, so there's 2 possible creative functions for any leading function. So for example, if your leading function is extroverted ethics, then your creative function must be introverted sensing or introverted intuition. Together they determine the rest of the model, the leading creative functions. So we get 8 times 2, which equals 16 types. The role function is the superego element of the leading function, so it's rational or irrational, extroverted or introverted if the leading function is, but it's the opposite domain. It's something that we sort of see value in, but we don't really deeply value it. It's like a superego in Freud's sense, in that we can respond to demands from others for it, but we'll sort of do the bare minimum and throw it away just as easily when we don't feel like it. The vulnerable function is the superego element of the creative. It's very devalued and very weak, so it's not something we really think about or see any value in. It's not really paid much attention to unless we're forced to by other people, and that can be very uncomfortable. The suggestive function complements the leading function, so it's the same rationality as the leading function, but the opposite domain and attitude. I see the suggestive as a blind spot. It's something we value a lot, we derive satisfaction from it, but we have difficulty providing it ourselves. We don't really focus on it spontaneously, but we notice it when it's not there. Some people will sometimes complain about how it's not being fulfilled in their life, or just simply ignore it. People can seek out help with it. This is the basis for what we call dual relations or duality between types, but the suggestive is sort of picky and can be a little bit sensitive when people actually try to help us with it or criticize us for it. And we don't like it using it ourselves so much. So the mobilizing is the same introversion or extroversion, the same attitude as the leading function. It complements the creative. It's something we use and focus on a lot, but it's more clumsy and not as naturally talented as the leading function. The mobilizing function is an aspirational function, and it's the one we tend to develop most over time. Sometimes it can be overused and can be annoying to others. The ignoring function is the contrary element to the leading function, so it's one we don't really value at all. So if your leading function is introverted ethics, your ignoring function will be extroverted ethics, and so on. It has an opposite agenda from the leading function, so it tends to be resisted, especially when other people use it. We don't really like it, although we can use it more for ourselves privately when we need to. The demonstrative function is the contrary element to the creative function. It's a very strong function, but it's not valued and it's used automatically, sort of in the background. It shares space with the creative function. They're mostly balanced as priorities, and we can access either of them according to the situation, but the demonstrative doesn't really get in the way of the creative's goal. So the leading, creative, suggestive, and mobilizing are the valued functions, and they make up our main priorities. And the other ones, the role, vulnerable, ignoring, and demonstrative, are the unvalued functions, which are deprioritized and not generally used for their own sake. But you also have the strong functions, which are the leading, creative, ignoring, and demonstrative. So even though you value the suggestive and mobilizing, they're not naturally as strong as the leading and creative. The functions that have the same attitude as the leading functions are called the bold functions, and the ones with the opposite attitude are called the cautious functions. Bold functions typically have higher energy, so they're easier to sustain. So in socionics, strength and value are somewhat independent, but the ignoring is not as strong in practice because it's both unvalued and cautious. And the mobilizing is stronger in practice because it's both valued and bold. Strength, value, and boldness are called the three presence traits, which make the element more present in the psyche and in the type's behavior. All combinations of these three traits are possible. You can have any of them being present or absent. But really it's better to characterize the functions by their relationships with each other, not as individual things. This is the best way to type people to see the relative balance of what they value and what they're good at. If you take the set of types that share values, you get what's called a quadra. There are 4 quadras, so there's 4 possibilities for what IMEs types can value. The 4 quadras are called alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Alpha quadra types value introverted logic, extroverted intuition, extroverted ethics, and introverted sensing, and they don't value extroverted logic, introverted intuition, introverted ethics, and extroverted sensing. So in each domain, a quadra values one of the 2 IMEs in it so that the valued elements aren't going to conflict with each other. Alpha is the quadra of inclusion. They value free expression and discussion and exploration of ideas. They tend to be the most open and inclusive kind of people and tend to not be very judgmental. Beta quadra values introverted logic, extroverted sensing, extroverted ethics, and introverted intuition, and don't value extroverted logic, introverted sensing, introverted ethics, and extroverted intuition. So beta is the quadra that focuses on making some kind of impact on their environment and conveying a message. They tend to be dramatic and value commitment to ideals and beliefs and asserting their beliefs in the world. Gamma quadra values extroverted logic, extroverted sensing, introverted ethics, and introverted intuition, and don't value introverted logic, introverted sensing, extroverted ethics, and extroverted intuition. So gamma is the opposite values from alpha. Gammas are the most skeptical quadra. They're pragmatists and they're selective about people and ideas. They value loyalty and resilience and personal independence and drive. So getting things done with your own effort and know-how and maximizing what gets accomplished. The 4th quadra is delta. Deltas value extroverted logic, introverted sensing, introverted ethics, and extroverted intuition, and don't value introverted logic, extroverted sensing, extroverted ethics, and introverted intuition. So it's the opposite of beta. Delta is the quadra of stability. They're open-ended about information. They like exploring information, but they don't like to make so many definite conclusions like alpha. They tend to include different perspectives equally. They value pragmatic activity more to improve the conditions in the here and now, unlike gamma, fixing up their environment and making sure it's in good working order. Socionics is more than just a typology. It has some metaphysical implications, and it says some things about the fundamental nature of our minds and how we process information. So I'll leave it at that for now. We can get into more detail in later videos. I know it's a lot of information to take in, but we'll expand on everything later, God willing. Until next time.